Hey everybody, Dr. Greco here. Welcome to Ministry in a Minute. So, last week we dealt with Jesus being the King of Kings. And if we go to Revelation 19:16, it says he is King of Kings and he is Lord of Lords. This week we're going to talk about him being Lord of Lords. And they're two very different things. One of the key components to good Christian theology is understanding that Jesus was both fully man and fully God. King of Kings is his completed role as a perfect human. But Lord of Lords is his perfect role as a perfect God, fully God. And we see that Jesus needs to be both. We see in John chapter 1, when John describes Jesus, he says that he came from the Father full of grace and truth. I believe the truth part is his earthly role, his humanly role, where he shows us how to live. There's something to obedience. But the grace part is about how God knows our hearts and God understands us and God wants to mold us into what he created us to be. And those two things, grace and truth, are always occurring simultaneously. And so we can't talk about the King of Kings without also describing the Lord of Lords, Jesus' perfection as our spiritual leader. In the beginning of the book of Colossians, Paul is explaining to the church at Colossae why Jesus is all they need. And he describes Jesus's perfection as the Lord of Lords in the beginning of chapter 1. And he begins in chapter 1, verse 15 by saying this: He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. And this initial description reminds us of something. When he says he's the image of God, the Greek word there is icon. We know what an icon is. If we want to know what God is like, if we want to see Jesus, if we want if we want a picture of God, look at Christ. He gives us that understanding of what God is. And I think that's important because, we look at Jesus and we understand that he's fully human. And we get that because we're human. But so many of the questions we have with our faith revolve around who is God? What's God like? What's his character like? Well, because he's Lord of Lords, not just King of Kings, when we look at Jesus, when we read about him, we see how he loved and how he lived and how he spoke and how he interpreted the Old Testament and how he brought the mission. We see God's character in its fullness. He is the image of God. A lot to learn about him being the Lord of Lords. We'll see more tomorrow in another Ministry in a Minute.